In the year 1996, Mrs. Huang, who was 38 years old at the time, was running the Andal restaurant in the Suseong district of Daegu, South Korea. Although it seemed like an ordinary restaurant at first glance, it was, in fact, a small-scale illegal entertainment bar equipped with female hostesses. The establishment had a license as a restaurant, but partitions were installed inside the hall to divide tables, allowing women to entertain guests while charging high prices for alcohol. In the past, the establishment had been caught in a crackdown, resulting in the cancellation of its license. However, in March 1994, it managed to obtain a relicensing and had been operating continually for 2 years since then. A week before the incident, 3 new female employees joined this establishment. They were a 25-year-old woman, referred to by the pseudonym Mi Yan, who came from Changnyeong in South Gyeongsang Province, a 24-year-old woman referred to as Yu Jung, and a 19-year-old woman referred to as Kim. With the arrival of new members, a total of 5 women, including 20-year-old Hua Su and the owner, Mrs. Huang, were working together at Andal. Then, on the night of July 9th, the day of the incident, 2 young men first visited the Andal. Hua Su attended to their table. The 3 were drinking together, and the atmosphere was warming up. For clarity, let us refer to them as a party. After a while, it became apparent that there were guests at a neighboring table as well. They were males in their late 20s to early 30s, around the same age group, who were speaking in a rough manner, asking for whiskey and beer to mix and drink together. As they mixed whiskey and beer, they were quickly getting rowdy and intoxicated. At that table, there was a new protagonist. At that table, the new employees, Mi Yan and Yu Jung, were attending to the guests. The establishment, almost empty with just about 2 tables occupied, gradually saw time pass by. Then, suddenly, with a loud crash, the sound of a bottle breaking pierced the air, followed by punches being thrown, and a physical altercation erupted. The situation was more serious than anticipated. The shrill screams of women could be heard amidst the chaos, and tables and chairs were being overturned. The commotion caused a great deal of shock. Within that room, a horrific scene unfolded. The owner, Huang, lay collapsed, having been stabbed. Witnessing this, Kim was so shocked that she trembled in fear, but had no choice but to comply with the perpetrator's demands. She retrieved bundles of cash from owner Huang's bag and handed them over to the assailants. After securing the money, the criminals began to exhibit very peculiar behavior. They meticulously removed any traces of themselves. They gathered the used liquor bottles, glasses, and even cigarette butts. Moreover, they threatened the group of 2 male customers, referred to as a party, to remove their clothes, and took those as well before casually escaping through the front door of the shop. Shortly after, the police arrived at the scene in response to the report. They immediately secured the area and commenced forensic work. On that day, the total number of people who died in this establishment was 3. Earlier, within the room, owner Huang had been found dead. Mi Yan, who was attending to the table of the perpetrators, was found deceased in the restroom. Similarly, Yu Jung was found dead in the hall, with multiple stab wounds to her chest and abdomen. Furthermore, Kim, a new employee, was stabbed 6 times in the abdomen and back. Her liver and lungs were damaged, and one of her kidneys had been severed. She sustained severe injuries but was barely alive and was transported to the hospital, where her life was saved. As the police assessed the chaotic scene, they instinctively thought, "This does not seem like the work of a first-time offender." This assumption was due to the behavior exhibited by the perpetrators after the crime. They meticulously gathered all potential evidence such as bottles, glasses, and cigarette butts that might contain their fingerprints. They even went so far as to steal the clothes of the witnesses to delay the time it would take for them to report the crime. Furthermore, the fact that they attacked and killed 4 women in a very short period suggests a high likelihood that this was not their first time committing murder. Despite the perpetrator's thorough cleanup of the crime scene, the police were confident that they must have missed something. During their investigation, they collected additional evidence. 8 unidentified fingerprints were found on the table where the perpetrators sat and in the men's restroom. Since there were hardly any other customers in the restaurant that day, and only 8 fingerprints were found, it seemed feasible to analyze these prints and find a match. However, such a task is only straightforward in modern times. Today, one would input the prints into a database and quickly obtain an identity. But in 1996, the automatic fingerprint identification system was still in its early stages of implementation. Although the fingerprints of the ex-convicts were registered somewhere, they were not shared nationwide, which posed another issue. In reality, the police could not achieve any results through fingerprint searches. All 8 fingerprints returned as unidentified. Thus, all that remained was the testimony of the witnesses. Who were the witnesses? It was Kim, who barely survived the attack. Kim, along with the 2 male customers who were part of the A party and whose clothes had been taken, as well as Mr. Hwasu. Fortunately, the composite sketch was created based on the synthesis of their testimonies. They described the perpetrators as males in their early 30s, of average build, and approximately 170 centimeters tall. One had curly hair, while the other had a short, sporty hairstyle. As this composite sketch was immediately distributed nationwide, about 30 reports followed. Unfortunately, none of them were related to the case at hand. Meanwhile, the police unexpectedly changed the direction of the investigation. Upon reflection, they realized that the perpetrators had left 3 witnesses who had seen their faces alive: the A party and Mr. Hwasu. Of course, there was also Kim, but they likely thought Kim was dead. The perpetrators had only stripped the clothes of these men and had not caused any other harm. From this, the police speculated, could it be that the targets were already predetermined? They began to think that the perpetrators had come to Andal restaurant with the intention of targeting the individuals who were killed from the outset. Furthermore, the survivor, Kim, also testified that the perpetrators seemed somewhat familiar. Could it be that a customer held a grudge against these 3 women? The investigation was conducted with the possibility of an acquaintance in mind. However, thinking back, was it possible that the 2 women had a customer who harbored resentment towards them? The employee had only been working there for about a week. It was unlikely for a regular customer to have a grudge against both the owner, Hwang, and these 2 individuals. They considered the possibility of a past customer, so they conducted inquiries, including checking the 28 phone numbers written in each of their notebooks and interviewing previous employees, but all efforts were in vain. They even searched through the call logs of the store's phone, but no meaningful results emerged. The investigation was encountering numerous difficulties. During this challenging period, another violent incident occurred in the area. This was a month after the Andal restaurant incident, on the late night of August 8th. A call was made to the Daegu South Police Station. My husband has been kidnapped. The perpetrators are demanding 150 million won, approximately 112,000 US dollars. Please, save my husband. The call was from a wife, whose husband was Woo Sung-guk, a 44-year-old high school mathematics teacher. The perpetrators had already called the house over 10 times, threatening to kill her husband if the money was not prepared. With this information, the police decided to set a trap. First, they planned to inform the culprits that the money was ready, and then have the wife go to the meeting point. The plan was to wait for the right moment to catch the culprits. On August 10th, 2 days later, in the afternoon, the wife was to wait for the culprits at the designated coffee shop at 3 o'clock. Of course, several detectives were undercover inside and around the area, waiting for the culprits. However, even after a long time past the appointed time, they did not show up. As they wondered whether they would not come, or if the plan was failing, a suspicious man was spotted by a police officer who was undercover outside. The man had circled the area before and was doing so again. It was clear that loitering without reason was suspicious. The vigilant police immediately surrounded the man and arrested him on the spot. They then obtained and checked his fingerprints, which, astonishingly, matched those found at the Andal tavern. This man had been involved in the kidnappings. The identity of the revealed criminal was 33-year-old Park Kwang. From a young age, he was notoriously known for engaging in delinquency and deviance. Upon hearing this, one might think, oh, was he not brought up in a difficult situation in a poor family? This assumption would be completely wrong. The father was a landlord who received several million won every month in rent. Several million won is approximately several thousand US dollars. Park Kwang grew up in an affluent environment. Furthermore, Park Kwang was known to be exceptionally intelligent from a young age. He excelled in his studies and had a cheerful and kind personality. He had many friends. This is quite different from the typical profile of a criminal that we might imagine. However, things started to go awry for him around the third year of middle school when he began running away from home. He was given a suspended indictment for theft. By the time he was 19 years old, he set fire to a cattle market where cows were bought and sold. While stealing cows and attempting to flee, the owner pursued him. Eventually, he ended up killing the owner. As a result of this crime, he received a 15-year prison sentence. He served his time until May 24, 1996, when he was granted parole as a special pardon for Buddha's birthday, a significant holiday in South Korea celebrating the birth of Buddha. Remarkably, it was less than 2 months after his parole that he committed yet another murder during a robbery at the Andal restaurant and even instigated a kidnapping incident. But it was not an act committed by Park Kwang alone. He had 2 accomplices. They were 26-year-old Won Young-ho and 31-year-old Lee Young-hwa. Both of these individuals had become friends with him while they were in prison. Park Kwang first met Won Young-ho in prison a year before he was released. Won Young-ho was also serving a 7-year sentence for the murder of his foster father, which created a bond between him and Park Kwang due to their shared history as murderers. In 1996, both of them were released from prison around the same time, which naturally led to them spending a lot of time together. On the evening of July 8th, the day of the incident, the two met up and, as usual, decided to go out for drinks. They started their night at a pojangmacha, which is a type of small, tented street food stall common in South Korea. Then, around 11:30 in the evening, they moved to the Andal restaurant for their second round. Here, they were served by Mi-yeon and Yoo-jung, and, over the course of an hour, they consumed 1 bottle of whiskey and several bottles of beer. As the night progressed, it became evident that the 2 men were getting quite drunk, which made one person particularly anxious, Mi-yeon, one of the employees. She thought to herself that she should probably settle the bill with them before they got any more intoxicated, so she presented them with the check. The amount on the bill was 300,000 won, which, even though this was an illegal entertainment bar, was a significant amount in 1996, approximately equivalent to 250 USD at the time. This upset the perpetrators, leading them to start arguing. They exclaimed, "Are you kidding us? This is way too expensive. How can you run this place like a restaurant but charge like a room salon, a type of upscale Korean bar known for its high prices? Are you not just a bunch of con artists?" However, Mi-yeon had often encountered such customers. She explained that this was a rule set by the owner of the restaurant and that there was no other choice. Without backing down, she faced the situation. As the argument unfolded, while Mi-yeon was working, Park Kwang suddenly stood up, claiming he needed to go to the restroom. Mi-yeon followed him, confronting him with a remark, "How can you come here when you cannot even pay an outstanding bill of 300,000 won, approximately 225 US dollars? If you are broke, you should not be drinking." In that moment, Park Kwang's expression turned cold. What? This man had a prior conviction for murder. He had been released from a harsh prison just 2 months ago. To him, it seemed absurd that this young woman, much younger than him, would speak to him in such a manner. He found it contemptuous. It was from this point that Park Kwang's violent outburst began. He rushed to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and brutally stabbed Mi-yeon. Her screams echoed, and the startled owner, Hwang, ran to the scene. He dragged her into an inner room and stabbed her to death as well. Yet, his anger was not appeased. Breathing heavily, Park Kwang returned to the main hall. Then, they proceeded to kill Yoo-jung as well. Why did they murder Yoo-jung? It was because she had seen their faces, and they wanted to prevent any future consequences. At this time, another victim, Miss Kim, was actually at a different table, some distance away. However, upon hearing the groans of Yoo-jung being stabbed, she wondered if something had happened to her older colleagues. As she approached, she was also suddenly attacked without any warning. In an instant, 3 women were brutally murdered, and another was stabbed simply for being there without any reason. But then, do you know what thoughts crossed the minds of Park Kwang and his accomplice, Won Young-ho, once they calmed down a bit? They thought, since things had turned out this way, they might as well seize some money. They then immediately extorted money from the customers at a nearby table and stole 1,410,000 won, approximately 1,060 US dollars, from the deceased owner, Miss Hwang's, bag before fleeing. After leaving the restaurant, they went straight to Park Kwang's house. Along the way, they disposed of the weapons they had brought, along with bottles of alcohol, glasses, cigarette butts, and other trash, into a pile. After taking a shower and changing clothes, they threw away their blood-stained clothes and shoes into a trash collection point. They were methodical in their actions. Shortly after, the two of them looked at each other and began to laugh heartily. It was laughter filled with madness. But their crime did not end there. Having already committed murder, they decided to escalate their plans further and began plotting a kidnapping. How could their thoughts take such a direction? 3 people have already died, yet they suggested playing a few more rounds. A new accomplice was added during the second crime, and that was none other than Lee Young-hwa, a friend from the same prison. Now a trio, they roamed around searching for a target. It was during this time that they thought of Woo Sung-guk, a high school mathematics teacher they had come across by chance. A mathematics teacher? They thought, you must be getting a lot of money from private tutoring fees these days, right? You might have some money. At that time, the enthusiasm for private education in South Korea was at its peak. So, upon hearing that he was a school teacher teaching mathematics, they assumed he would probably be making a considerable amount of money from private tutoring on the side. They made a phone call. Ah, teacher, I have a nephew who is doing well in everything except struggling a bit with mathematics. Could you tutor him? This is how they lured him. They arranged to meet on August 8th at a sushi restaurant. Woo Sung-guk was abducted by the trio in this manner. This is how they lured him. Now, returning to the scene, around the time when the perpetrator Park Kwang was arrested near a coffee shop on August 10th, his accomplices, Won Young-ho and Lee Young-hwa, were also circling the area in a car. At that time, a man named Woo Sung-guk was trapped in the trunk. They were on high alert, waiting for the perfect moment when Park Kwang would come out with the money. However, it turned out to be the worst scenario for them as Park Kwang was caught right in front of them. Meanwhile, Woo Sung-guk remained confined in the trunk. Won Young-ho and Lee Young-hwa abandoned the victim on a central escape route and managed to obscure their whereabouts. During the ongoing investigation, it was discovered that 1,500,000 won, approximately 1,100 USD, was withdrawn from Lee Young-hwa's mother's account. It was the mother who made the withdrawal, leading to the assumption that the son would try to collect the money. Therefore, there was a possibility he would hide nearby. The police, based on this assumption, thoroughly searched the Bisandong area of Daegu. Finally, in the early hours of August 15th, they succeeded in arresting Won Young-ho and Lee Young-hwa, who had been hiding in an empty house. They had been living in seclusion in the hills of Chungcheong Province and the Gangwon region, but returned to their hometown of Daegu when they ran out of money. With the capture of the main perpetrator Park Kwang and both accomplices, they are now awaiting justice. However, before the verdict, there is one critical point that needs to be addressed. While listening to this case, did you not find any part of it puzzling? Initially, the police investigated the case under the assumption that it was the act of an acquaintance, suggesting that the victims were specifically targeted. This assumption was not logical, though. The reason being, 2 of the victims had only arrived a week prior, and there was little overlap with Hwang. Nevertheless, the police spent a considerable amount of time on this line of investigation, ultimately wasting valuable time. Moreover, there was an issue with the composite sketch. The victim, Miss Kim, who had provided testimony related to this composite sketch, pointed out several times, "No, the real perpetrator's face is slimmer than this, and their hair is a bit longer, with sideburns." However, for some reason, the police completely ignored this. Why did they do that? It might be a negative thought, but could it be that they already had a suspect in mind and tried to make the sketch resemble that person? Surely not, right? Furthermore, a significant issue that was revealed through this case is the fingerprint management system in South Korea. Consider this. Park Kwang and Lee Young-hwa, who were prison mates, both have previous convictions for murder. Naturally, their fingerprints would have been registered when they were arrested and sent to prison. But why was this information not known? Even though the fingerprint registration system was in its early stages at the time, how can you catch the perpetrator if you cannot find this information? Currently, the recidivism rate of criminals in South Korea is reported to be 50%. In my opinion, even if not for ordinary people, the fingerprints of criminals should have been thoroughly managed. But this case exposed a loophole. As a result, after the incident, there was fierce criticism, and the fingerprint system in South Korea was completely overhauled. That is at least some good news. Now, returning to the verdict, the first trial was held on December 1st, 4 months after the incident in 1996. In this case, the court judged that the main perpetrator, Park Kwang, committed murder and attempted abduction just 2 months after being paroled, indicating that there was no potential for rehabilitation. Therefore, he was sentenced to death. As for Won Young-ho, an accomplice in the Andal restaurant case, he did not directly participate in the murder. Thus, he received a sentence of 15 years imprisonment for attempted robbery involving special circumstances and attempted hostage-taking. Lastly, Lee Young-hwa, since he was not involved in the Andal incident at all, was only charged with attempted hostage-taking and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. During the appeal trial, the court maintained that there would be no leniency for Park Kwang, upholding his death sentence. However, the sentences for Won Young-ho and Lee Young-hwa were reduced to 10 years and 7 years, respectively. Yet Park Kwang questioned why only their sentences were reduced and filed another appeal, which was decisively dismissed. Park Kwang is currently recorded as one of the surviving death row inmates. As of now, he has served over 28 years in prison. News from prison was rather surprising. He reportedly passed the middle and high school equivalency exams while incarcerated. He also obtained a bachelor's degree from the Korea National Open University. Even more astonishing is that since 2009, he registered 4 patents related to renewable energy. In 2018, through arrangements made by Daegu Prison, he underwent DNA testing and reunited with his biological mother, whom he had longed to meet for his entire life. This is not being shared to glorify his actions, but there is a certain bitterness upon hearing this. Certainly, he committed crimes and is serving a restricted life in prison. Yet, it seems that a murderer who took the lives of 3 people is living a relatively peaceful life. This situation made me ponder once again about what justice truly means in our society. What are your thoughts on this matter? Stay tuned. The second story is coming up, and it will make you think even more. The Cartman Triangle is a psychological model that illustrates how people interact. particularly within destructive or manipulative relationships. Developed by Stephen Karpman, an American psychiatrist, this model identifies three roles often assumed during conflicts: the persecutor, the victim, and the rescuer. In today's story, the heroine tried to save a monster. But you can't save or reform a beast. It will devour you whole. Change must come from within, and no one can be transformed against their will. Expecting a monster to change is like a fly trying to convince a spider not to weave its web. On March 17, 2021, a young resident of Novosibirsk arrived at a two-room apartment on Koshernakov Street, which his friends had rented, to congratulate his friend Anastasia on her 17th birthday. However, the festive atmosphere quickly turned into confusion, and then horror. Inside the apartment, he discovered numerous bloodstains, and in one of the rooms lay Anastasia's lifeless body, brutally wounded. When the terrible news about what had happened reached Anastasia's close friends, no one had any doubt. Her 19-year-old boyfriend, Fyodor, with whom she had been living, was the one who took her life. He had been struggling with various addictions for a long time and had shown aggression towards her. This story is recorded from the words of Daria, Fyodor's sister. In today's video, we will touch upon the topic of prohibited substances. It's important to emphasize that the use of such substances inevitably destroys lives, and today's story is yet another vivid example of this. It will be harsh, heavy, and not suitable for everyone. Anastasia and Fyodor attended the same school where they first met. They began dating when Anastasia was in the 8th grade, and Fyodor was in the 10th. At some point, Anastasia decided to move out of her parents' home and live with her boyfriend. The couple rented that very two-room apartment on Koshernakov Street a couple of months before the tragedy. According to those close to her, Anastasia's mother was a good and sensible woman. Her father had passed away, though the circumstances of his death are unknown. Her mother was very worried about her daughter and tried to convince her to return home, but Anastasia was stubborn and refused. Daria, Fyodor's sister, recalls, "I believe my brother pressured her a lot, which is why she behaved that way. 16 years old, first love, first boyfriend. He was 2 years older, seemed grown up and cool." After finishing the 9th grade, Anastasia enrolled in college. Those close to her described her as a bright, open person with a sharp sense of humor, which made her choice of Fyodor as a boyfriend puzzling to many. Despite her positive qualities, her social media showed that Anastasia did not shy away from using foul language, posting photos with cigarettes, and engaging in candid discussions about alcohol and prohibited substances. She also shared revealing photos on her Twitter and mentioned plans to create an account on a popular platform where similar content could be monetized. All of this occurred when Anastasia was just 16 years old. Whether this behavior was the result of her relationship with an older boyfriend and his influence on her is difficult to say now. Daria shared that she and Fyodor had known each other since childhood, though they had different mothers, and their relationship was not always easy. "Fyodor was always withdrawn as long as I can remember," Daria recalls. "He was always sitting at the computer. We weren't particularly close. He was like a stone, always in himself, but I cared about him." At the age of 16, alcohol appeared in Fyodor's life. He often drank heavily at parties and then, for the first time, tried prohibited substances. One day, Fyodor told me he had found a good girl from his school. She was 15 years old, Anastasia. "I met her. She was a beautiful and pleasant girl, smart," Daria continues. Anastasia didn't lead a healthy lifestyle. She could drink and smoke, but she was absolutely against prohibited substances. She and Fyodor constantly fought over this, and it happened that I even covered for my brother in front of her. I told her he wasn't using, even though we were all doing it in that company. He cheated on her right in front of me. I thought, why ruin their relationship? He would stop and everything would be fine, right? In his relationship, Fyodor exhibited cruelty and instability, which was primarily linked to his destructive addictions. Due to his dependency, the couple frequently had arguments. Anastasia often begged him to stop using, which irritated Fyodor, and he frequently took his frustrations out on her. At 19, Fyodor wasn't in school and worked as a cashier at a supermarket. He openly expressed his hatred for his job online. His small salary was not enough to meet his needs, and he often relied on the finances of his underage girlfriend. At the same time, Anastasia wasn't working, as she was still studying. Her parents provided her with financial support. Fyodor turned out to be completely irresponsible. All of Anastasia's gold jewelry and phones repeatedly ended up in pawn shops for his next fix. People would tell her, "Leave him or report him to the police so they can lock him up and you'll live a normal life." But she held on to hope that things would change. Fyodor's acquaintances mentioned that he tried to get Anastasia hooked on prohibited substances. It's quite possible that at some point he succeeded, despite her initial firm stance. Both law enforcement and Fyodor's sister would later point to this fact, but we will return to that later. While Fyodor was sinking deeper into his harmful habits, his sister Daria, on the contrary, started realizing the magnitude of the problem. "At some point, our lives just went in different directions," Daria shares. Meanwhile, the relationship between Fyodor and Anastasia became increasingly strained. They broke up several times, only to reconcile again. It seems Anastasia understood that their relationship was unhealthy, and that she was both a psychological and physical victim. She tried to process what was happening by posting memes on her Twitter account, which seemed more like a hidden cry for help. In Anastasia's Twitter, there were posts that reflected her internal state. Once, she showed a friend a photo of her bruised hand, which she captioned, suggesting that there was violence in her relationship. Friends of the couple said that Fyodor frequently cheated on Anastasia, and she knew about it, but turned a blind eye, possibly due to her strong attachment and feelings for him. Fyodor was also active on social media, where he openly displayed his addictions and sometimes posted provocative tweets. His posts about Anastasia were often filled with disdain and a cynical tone. Over time, Fyodor began to lose friends because of his destructive habits. One of his female friends told the CBFM portal that she stopped communicating with him shortly before the tragedy. She recalled, "Although Fyodor was strange, he never showed aggression. He was antisocial and withdrawn. It was hard to connect with him. But despite this, he was always kind and sweet, at least toward me. He got into prohibited substances very suddenly, said that people were just offering them to him. That's when I decided to end our communication." Fyodor's parents were also aware of their son's addiction and tried to help him. In the summer of 2020, they sent him to a rehabilitation center. However, it later turned out that the facility was operating illegally, and in August of that year, it was raided by law enforcement after complaints from former patients about being held there against their will, having their passports confiscated, and other abuses. After an incomplete 20-day treatment, Fyodor returned home and soon fell back into his usual wild lifestyle, filled with parties and substance use. Despite all the difficulties, Anastasia held on to hope that she could help her boyfriend overcome his addiction, which had turned him into a cruel person. Unfortunately, that hope proved to be fatal for her. Anastasia's friends told investigators that in the last 2 or 3 weeks, the relationship between Anastasia and Fyodor had become even more strained. The young woman even started receiving threats from unknown individuals, and those around her were convinced that Fyodor was behind these threats. On February 14th, just a few weeks before the tragedy, Anastasia posted on her Twitter that instead of a Valentine's card, she had received an anonymous note. However, the real shock for her followers came from another tweet she shared on the eve of her death. Anastasia revealed that Fyodor, in a state of paranoia and accusations, had cheated on her, and as she put it, in a non-traditional way. This tweet sparked a storm of discussion online, gathering dozens of reposts and hundreds of comments. There are several theories about what might have triggered the final argument between Fyodor and Anastasia on the night of March 6th into 7th. One theory suggests that Anastasia's public statement on Twitter provoked the conflict. Another theory suggests that Fyodor had asked Anastasia for money to buy another dose of prohibited substances that night, and she refused. Regardless of the specifics, around 2 o'clock in the morning, during the heat of their argument, Fyodor, under the influence of substances, took a knife from the kitchen and hid it under a blanket. When Anastasia tried to hug Fyodor, he suddenly pulled out the knife and began stabbing her. The brutality of the crime was shocking. No fewer than 48 stab wounds were inflicted on her neck and head, as well as her face, hands, and chest. In total, forensic experts counted about 85 injuries on Anastasia's body. During the murder, The neighbors heard screams coming from the apartment, but they didn't intervene. According to them, the couple often argued, so no one thought to call the authorities. Fyodor stayed at the crime scene for some time. After Anastasia stopped breathing, he took more prohibited substances and fell asleep next to her body. Fyodor made no effort to hide the fact that he had killed Anastasia. Later, he began messaging his friends, telling them what had happened, even sending them photos from the crime scene. After some time, possibly sobering up and realizing what he had done, Fyodor decided to leave the city. He transferred 3,000 rubles from Anastasia's bank card to his own account, took an additional 300 rubles in cash from her purse, grabbed her laptop, which he later sold at a pawn shop for 7,000 rubles, and pawned her iPhone. With the money he had gathered, Fyodor planned to flee to Kemerovo to meet up with an acquaintance. In one of his text messages, the following chilling words were found. "Don't repeat my mistakes. And now goodbye. I loved you a lot as a friend, but now really there's no other way. I killed someone. She took about 5 minutes to die. The knife was dull. I feel really sorry for her mother. She tried to hug me, but I had the knife hidden under the blanket." On his way to Kemerovo, the car Fyodor was traveling in got into an accident. Stranded without transportation, he started trying to flag down passing cars. A truck driver picked him up, unaware that he was giving a ride to a murderer who was already being actively sought by the authorities. At the same time, the police in Novosibirsk, who had arrived at the crime scene after being alerted by Anastasia's friend, had already begun tracking down the main suspect. They quickly identified the acquaintance Fyodor was heading to and got in touch with her by phone. When the woman learned that Fyodor had brutally killed Anastasia, she was shocked but immediately agreed to cooperate with the police. The woman from Kemerovo provided the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia, MVD, the Russian equivalent of the Department of Justice and Law Enforcement in the U.S., with photos from the accident that Fyodor had sent her. At the request of the police, she arranged to meet Fyodor, not at her home, but near a shopping center. Fyodor, completely unaware, showed up at the location, where he was promptly arrested and escorted back to Novosibirsk. The entire operation to locate and capture the suspect took 4 hours. Daria, Fyodor's sister, recalls, "One evening, a mutual friend messaged me and asked for our dad's phone number. I asked why. He told me that Fyodor had killed Anastasia and that he needed to tell our father. At first, I thought it was some kind of joke, but then I called my dad and he already knew. That was the worst day of my life. I had never heard my father speak to me in that tone before. It was a voice filled with complete despair. He was crying. I had never seen my dad cry." During interrogation, Fyodor did not resist and gave a full confession. He cited a domestic argument as the motive for the murder, though investigators leaned more towards financial reasons. Accompanied by the police, Fyodor returned to the crime scene and detailed how he had committed the murder and what he had done afterward. Following this, the court placed Fyodor in a detention center for further investigation. The funeral for Anastasia was not covered by the media. The only source of information came from Daria, who shared that the farewell ceremony was beautiful and that the costs of the funeral were covered by Fyodor's father and mother, as Anastasia's mother did not have the money. The criminal case was not brought to the regional court until November 16, 2021. Fyodor was charged with 2 offenses, murder and theft of items of special value. During the court session, it was revealed in the indictment that Anastasia had also been using prohibited substances. According to the prosecution, on March 6, 2021, the young couple had consumed narcotics together, after which Fyodor inflicted no fewer than 59 stab wounds on Anastasia, resulting in her death on the spot. After ensuring that Anastasia had died, Fyodor stole cash, a mobile phone, and a laptop worth more than 50,000 rubles, and then fled the scene. Prosecutor Maria Shine stated that the prosecution had recommended that Fyodor be sentenced to 18 years in a maximum security penal colony. Daria confirmed that prohibited substances were also found in Anastasia's blood, adding, "I saw it in the case file." A psychiatric evaluation concluded that Fyodor did not suffer from any mental disorders, and his addiction did not prevent him from understanding and controlling his actions. During the court hearing, Fyodor was given the opportunity to speak. However, instead of offering sincere remorse, the court heard only a monotone speech, read from a piece of paper. I admit my guilt in committing the murder after the argument, for which I am remorseful. I understand that no apologies or words can ever ease the grief. I did not intend to cause her suffering or pain. I do not admit guilt in the robbery charge. The reason for the murder and our argument is completely different, which I am ready to explain to the court later, after all the case materials have been examined. Fyodor's lawyer stated in court that his client had become a victim of media attention, which led to overly harsh charges that, according to the defense, did not correspond to the actual case materials. The final hearing on this case took place on August 31, 2022. On that day, the court, taking into account mitigating circumstances such as Fyodor's confession, remorse, health condition, and his positive character references, sentenced him to 15 years in a maximum security penal colony. Additionally, the victim's side filed a lawsuit seeking compensation for material damages amounting to approximately $4,000 and $100,000 for emotional distress. The court fully granted this claim. Daria, Fyodor's sister, recalls, "He tried to keep in touch with me after the murder, but I cut off communication. Through his messages, I could tell that he was trying to blame me for getting him hooked on prohibited substances, implying that's why he killed Anastasia. I saw zero remorse in him. It was incredibly painful. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he's a complete monster, but I knew it would be pointless. It's been 2 years now, and I've somewhat moved on. But the pain for my father and for Anastasia's loved ones will likely never go away." Stay tuned for the next story. In the evening of February 2, 2017, at 5:35 p.m., a dull sound echoed from a building in the Cheongjeong district of Cheongcheong province. On the second floor, there was an orthopedic clinic, and a nurse, hearing this sound, felt a sense of alarm and decided to open the hospital door. Before her lay a man, bleeding profusely, with his body positioned on the staircase. His legs were elevated, and his head was lower. In horror, the nurse called for an ambulance by dialing 119. Soon, a doctor from the clinic emerged and began performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation. The ambulance arrived and rushed the man to the emergency room, but he succumbed to his injuries. The cause of death was severe blood loss. 4 stab wounds from a sharp knife were found on his neck, left forearm, and left shoulder. He was likely wounded before arriving at the hospital and collapsed at the door. The victim was identified as 51-year-old Pak Si. The police quickly traced the crime scene. Blood trails along the road led to a cafe located 50 meters from the clinic. This establishment was situated in a densely populated area with numerous apartment buildings, suggesting that there could be plenty of witnesses. At 5:30 p.m., during rush hour after work, there should have been many people in the nearby cafe. However, it turned out that the cafe staff did not fully understand what had transpired. They noted only that a couple of patrons, a man and a woman, had quickly left the establishment. It was likely that the deceased, Pak Si, was among them. Furthermore, Pak Si worked at a nearby high school as a career guidance counselor. Who could have attacked this teacher? It appeared to be a woman. Approximately 1 hour and 20 minutes after the incident, at 7 p.m., a middle-aged couple entered the Ochang police station with worried expressions. The police officer instinctively sensed that they were the suspects, as the description of the woman matched the testimony of the cafe staff. The woman, hesitating, confessed, I stabbed someone." 46-year-old Lee Jonghwa came to the police station with her husband, who had convinced her to do so. She turned out to be an ordinary housewife with no criminal record. When the police asked her why she committed such a crime, Lee Jonghwa began to calmly explain her relationship with the victim. She had a daughter who was a junior in high school, and Pak Si had been her academic advisor. Thus, there was a parent-teacher relationship between them. It turns out that a parent killed a teacher right in the city center. Pak Si was a qualified teacher working as a vocational instructor, which meant that he did not have a teaching diploma but was a professional with industry experience who helped students with career choices. So, Pak Si was not only involved in counseling, but also in guiding students for internships and job placements. Lee Jonghwa's daughter had also been receiving advice from Pak Si until recently, and their relationship was good. She even respected her teacher. But why did the mother, Lee Jonghwa, kill her daughter's teacher? She revealed a shocking story. Her daughter had allegedly been subjected to sexual harassment by Pak Si. According to her, a dinner with the teacher was planned for the evening of February 1st. Lee Jong-hwa became uneasy when she learned that her daughter was going to meet with the teacher outside of school. She asked her daughter if she could skip the meeting, but the girl, on the verge of graduation, was filled with anxiety and hopes for her career, believing that Pak Si could help her. The daughter left the house and called her mother at 10 p.m., assuring her that everything was fine. Although her voice sounded cheerful, Lee Jong-hwa was still worried. Her daughter was coming home too late. As she struggled to prepare for her night shift, Lee Jong-hwa received a message from her husband that was saved on her phone. At that time, Lee Jong-hwa's daughter continued communicating with the teacher, which irritated her mother. When the clock showed 10:56, Lee Jong-hwa unexpectedly received a call from her younger daughter. "Mom, my older sister is here, but it seems something is wrong," she said, and a wave of anxiety swept over Lee Jong-hwa. She attempted to contact her daughter several times, but the girl did not answer. Finally, after several attempts, she managed to hear her older daughter's voice. "Mom, something terrible happened," the daughter said, and this filled Lee Jong-hwa with worry. She reassured her, suggesting they talk when they met, and immediately after her shift ended at 7 in the morning, she hurried home. However, upon meeting her daughter, Lee Jong-hwa realized that her fears had come true. The daughter revealed horrifying things. During dinner and at karaoke, Pak Si had forcibly kissed her and groped her breasts, then tried to remove her pants. The girl was afraid that if she upset the teacher, he would not help her with finding a job, so she could not just walk away. The teacher had stated that it would be their little secret. Her daughter's words ignited a fury in Lee Jong-hwa. She immediately tried to call Pak Si, but he did not answer. Then she left him a message. "What did you do to my daughter? I will not let this go." Soon after, Pak Si called back and stated that he was planning to resign. But this was merely a formal step, as his contract was set to expire at the end of the month. Despite this, Lee Jong-hwa felt no sincerity in his words and continued to be angry. In search of solace, she began drinking beer early in the morning and became lost in her thoughts. Lee Jong-hwa sent another message. "Let's meet at the cafe." Then she texted her sister. "I can't take this anymore. I won't let this go. I'll end this and go to prison." After that, she took an 11-centimeter kitchen knife and left the house. On the same day, February 2nd, at 5:25 p.m., Lee Jong-hwa was already waiting in the cafe with the murder weapon in her bag. A few minutes later, Pak Si arrived. Instead of the expected apologies, he calmly sat down and said, "Let's have a drink." Lee Jong-hwa, unable to contain her anger, began to confront him. "How could you, teacher, do this to a student?" The exchange lasted only 1 to 2 minutes when Pak Si, apparently deciding to avoid the conversation, stood up and said he was going to the restroom. Lee Jong-hwa saw this as her chance. She pulled the knife from her bag and approached him from behind, stabbing him in the neck and shoulder. Pak Si, in shock, covered the wound with his hand and hurriedly ran out of the cafe. Lee Jong-hwa chased after him but soon turned in another direction, heading toward the trash bins to dispose of the murder weapon before returning home. There, she told her husband what had happened, and after his urging, she decided to turn herself in to the police. This concludes Lee Jong-hwa's testimony. The circumstances of the crime were recorded by surveillance cameras in the cafe, confirming that her account had some basis. However, there is another significant issue. How truthful is her claim regarding the motives for the crime? The victim is already dead, and only the accused's version remains. Once these statements became known, acquaintances of the deceased Pak Si began to protest, particularly his colleagues from the school. They stated that Pak Si was a person who worked 14 hours a day and genuinely cared for his students. The family of Pak Si also protested. This confirmed that Pak Si had a good reputation. Now it is necessary to determine whether an incident of sexual harassment truly occurred that evening at the karaoke, which served as the motive for this crime. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras in the karaoke. Instead, the police decided to track the actions of Lee Jong-hwa and her daughter the day before the incident. As a result, they found crucial evidence. Firstly, the time when Lee Jong-hwa's daughter left and met with Pak Si was around 5 p.m. They had dinner and then headed to a bar. However, by that time, it was already around 9 p.m. Lee Jong-hwa's daughter, having reached adulthood, was legally allowed to drink alcohol. But it was still strange that a teacher took his student to a bar. The establishment's owners also noted that Lee Jonghwa's daughter was very young. She had just turned 20, and they checked her ID. Moreover, the age difference between them was so significant that at first they thought it was a father with his daughter. But now, as the daughter began to speak politely, she started to doubt whether this was appropriate. So they sat in the bar and drank 3 bottles of soju. Their subsequent actions were confirmed by surveillance cameras on a nearby street. The video showed that Pak Si appeared to be drunk and was unsteadily walking down the street with another teacher. This was the road to the karaoke. At midnight, transitioning into February 2nd, they entered the karaoke and paid for an hour. The karaoke owner remembered them well because when they entered the room, not a single song was heard for an entire hour. Silence. Additionally, there were no other customers in the karaoke that day, which made the owner wonder why there were no sounds. An hour passed, and when the owner was about to offer them some complimentary time, they exited the room. The owner asked, "I was going to offer you a service. Why did you leave so quickly?" Pak replied jokingly, "If you were going to offer a service, you could have done it earlier, and we could have sung a bit more." However, at that moment, the owner noticed something strange. Lee Jonghwa's daughter stepped back and quietly bowed to the karaoke owner, as if signaling not to offer any more services. This suddenly gave him a sense of a strange atmosphere, and he escorted them to the exit. This moment was also captured on the karaoke's surveillance cameras. According to the owner, Lee Jonghwa's claim that her daughter had been subjected to sexual harassment seems to have some basis. Although this occurred in the room, which cannot be proven on its own, consider the circumstances. The subject teacher took his student to a bar, where they drank 3 bottles of soju, and then spent the entire night in karaoke, where not a single song was heard. All of this seemed completely abnormal. Furthermore, testimonies began to emerge that raised questions. After the case became known, journalists hit the streets to investigate the situation. At that time, another student of Pak Si decided to share her experience. She recounted that just a month before the incident, she had also encountered an uncomfortable situation. During an interview, Pak Si had offered to give her a ride home. Not suspecting anything wrong, she got into the car. But that was when the incident occurred. Without hesitation, Pak began to touch her chin and uttered the phrase, "How cute you are." He then asked who was waiting for her at home. When she replied that her father was waiting, he said, "What a pity." Then he added, "You're so cute that I feel like kidnapping you." These were words that a teacher should never have said. It was extremely inappropriate. After that, he continued to contact her. However, as previously mentioned, Pak had a decent reputation among the students. Thus, the student thought that perhaps his closeness was merely a sign of care for them. Nevertheless, she felt uncomfortable, which was entirely natural. Pak's actions drastically changed the situation. Although we cannot justify the murder committed by the mother, it is essential to understand what drove the parent to attack the teacher. In our country, private vengeance is strictly prohibited. However, at least we can comprehend what pushed her to such a step. Nevertheless, the police continued to doubt her testimony. If her daughter had indeed faced harassment, shouldn't she have reported it to the police or the school rather than going to the teacher with a knife? Perhaps it is worth considering whether she had other motives for the murder. However, no new evidence aside from her words was found. On June 2, 2017, the Court of First Instance deemed the murder premeditated and planned. She had informed her brother of her intentions and prepared the murder weapon. The court ruled that despite her daughter having faced harassment, the act of revenge could not be justified within the bounds of the law. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison. 6 months later, an appeals court overturned the previous decision and reduced the sentence to 7 years. The judges noted that the murder could not be justified by any means. However, they took into account that harassment had occurred and that the accused voluntarily surrendered to the police, demonstrating remorse. A 7-year sentence for a murderer in Korea is considered unusually lenient, which may indicate the court's understanding of the maternal feelings of anger and grief. However, it is important to remember that there is another victim in this story, the daughter, who trusted her teacher and ultimately lost her mother when she became a murderer. She likely suffers from feelings of guilt. Was going out to dinner a mistake? Did her unwillingness to confront the harassment lead to this tragedy? Or did she regret telling her mother everything? I want to tell her. It is not your fault. I hope that the hearts filled with pain and fear heal quickly.